This is Randall here in Texas.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Today, Randall and I are doing something a little bit different for our number 7 call-up episode. Randall and I recently watched the Star Wars prequels again, and today we're going to take a deeper dive into the prequels to give some new context on how those movies fit with the whole Skywalker saga and Star Wars in general. So Randall, what do you think after rewatching the Star Wars prequels?
Reflecting upon the prequels after having rewatched them recently, and again, if you haven't already seen our reviews, check them out. Really, they're not as bad as I remember them, except episode 2 is still awful.
I don't like sand.
Given some time and some context, I think some Star Wars films age better than others, and the prequels, even though they're not necessarily great films.
This is where the fun begins.
Now that we've had the sequel trilogy and we've seen what Disney Star Wars is kind of going to be like with some of their offshoots, the prequels, at least like you said previously in one of our reviews, at least they had this idea, this overarching theme, this storyline that it was trying to tell, and I can respect that. And watching them with all of Clone Wars behind me, with all of the sequel trilogy behind me, they do work better than they did when I first saw them.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what you were saying too, on especially being enhanced with the Clone Wars and stuff. Before, I kind of watched the prequels as being like so different from the original trilogy. It just didn't kind of fit. And we talked too about in our previous reviews how we felt how the relationship between like Anakin and Obi-Wan should be about, and we didn't really get that just watching the films. But with the Clone Wars adding more context, building that relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, that kind of feels better. It makes watching the prequels more enjoyable. I got more emotional seeing different parts, knowing stuff that I knew from watching Clone Wars.
Now, that being said, one of the things that the Clone Wars just doesn't do for me, and don't get me wrong, I love Ahsoka. Her character's great. She still doesn't really fit in with the prequels as they stood. You got to remember that the Clone Wars comes out after the prequel trilogy, and Ahsoka's character wasn't really defined or thought about or mentioned, and I know that they kind of make it make sense. It does work, but what we had with Anakin and Ahsoka, where Anakin's her master, and he's consistently called a master throughout the series.
Hello, Master.
That's what I wanted to see with Obi-Wan and Anakin. I'm like, okay, as much as I love Ahsoka and her storyline, I wanted those characters to be Obi-Wan and Anakin, not Anakin being a master, which didn't make any sense in the context of episode 3, where he's just a Jedi Knight.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What?
That is a sticking point for me. Like, why do that? You could have had this really awesome dynamic and friendship between these two, and then when episode 3 comes, if you're watching it kind of like in chronological order, the betrayal and really feel Obi-Wan and Anakin.
You were my brother, Anakin! I loved you!
Instead, you get Anakin and Ahsoka.
I think too maybe it's because the Clone Wars was trying to appeal to sometimes at a younger audience earlier on, and with Anakin and Obi-Wan being kind of older, you're adding kind of like that younger new character in to try to bring in that younger audience along with you. The only real mention that we have of Ahsoka in the movies is in the last one, episode 9, where Rey hears her voice along with other like Jedi.
Every Jedi who ever lived lives in you.
The Force surrounds you, Rey.
Let it guide you as it guided us.
Like you said, Ahsoka is a good character, but yeah, it's kind of interesting how she's around during all this time, yet we don't have any mention or any reference to her really in any of the movies.
Yeah, and it's similar to Qui-Gon's character, and we touched on this in our episode 1 review, where he's a great character and it's well acted by Liam Neeson, but man, there's no mention of him in episode 4 by Obi-Wan. or episode 5, really, he straight up says, hey, go to Dagobah.
There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed me.
Yeah, sure, if you're talking about being instructed when you were a youngling and Yoda just kind of apparently instructed all the younglings, that's not special. Qui-Gon's character doesn't make any sense in that context. Like, he doesn't need to be in episode 1. You could have Obi-Wan and Anakin in episode 1, but it's the same with Ahsoka's character. Like, even though she's great and even though Qui-Gon's great, you sit back and you're like, well, we didn't really need that new character because it's already established in your original trilogy, all these things. And that just kind of gets into a different topic of why all these inconsistencies with the prequels and other parts of pre-existing canon. Not even stuff that's been built after the fact, like Clone Wars, but like, why is there so much like already established Star Wars canon just thrown out the window with the prequels?
Yeah, it's almost like George just wanted to tell a new story and wasn't really as concerned about kind of connecting the dots between the two. It's almost like at the end of episode 3, we get that kind of like, all right, we're gonna show some stuff that hints to where we're at in the original trilogy to kind of connect these stories together. I guess our idea of the prequels after watching the original trilogy of what the prequels will be kind of didn't match up. And I guess that's on us. I think George was more trying to do a new story and not really worrying too much about his previous story or really putting them together, which I think is disappointing when you're trying to make a whole Skywalker saga.
It is. It really is. And like on the flip side, if you look at like the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit goes too far trying to like match up with the Lord of the Rings, and it didn't need to. But in this one, it's just like George didn't go far enough trying to match up with what was already there. He just kind of said, I don't care, because I'm the creator of this universe and I have final say over this universe. And it really just makes fans like me, hardcore fans almost, just angry at you. And for what purpose? We've had conversations before where we talk about like where Star Wars is going now with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and how they actually respect canon a lot more than George respected it. And I think that the storylines that they tell where they actually try to respect canon work so much better for existing fans and bringing in new fans than the way George did it, where he just says, I'm the creator and I say what goes. What I say goes.
It's like if you paint your house white and somebody comes along, well, that should be a greenhouse. Well, fine, but I wanted to paint it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with painting it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with me for painting it white. Maybe it should be a greenhouse. But I didn't want it to be a greenhouse. I wanted it to be a White House.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that. One of the examples, kind of like Filoni kind of sticking with canon, is with Clone Wars, which both George and Dave worked together on, where there's this line in Revenge of the Sith where Anakin and Grievous meet.
Anakin Skywalker, I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little older.
You're kind of thinking all right, over this entire Clone War, they never met. And you kind of think about that, well, do they meet in Clone Wars? And they did a good job of having Anakin and Grievous get maybe close to meeting where they may face off, and then not. Something happens where they don't meet, in order to uphold that one line that maybe seemed insignificant to some or whatever, but they took the extra effort to make that. And it's stuff like that you appreciate. You enjoy that they did that extra effort to do that.
Yeah, and it's stuff like that gains you goodwill among your existing fan base. Goodwill goes a long, long ways in TV and Hollywood land, Don't make your existing fan base jaded by your decisions to do away with certain things. In particular, if we're talking about George and some of the things that he did, the special editions were kind of all right, him saying, these are the movies I wanted to make, but I couldn't make. And you're like, oh, okay. And he didn't really change much in the special editions. You know, they fancied things up. They made some things look better. They inserted some scenes. For example, the scene with Jabba was already filmed with Han Solo and Jabba. And that scene pretty much worked. I mean, it was cartoonish because of the CGI at the time. The special editions, they don't really bother me that much. What bothered me as a fan was that George went through and he kept tinkering and he kept changing things. So when the prequels came out, he altered the original films to make his prequels work better. And that is an unforgivable sin to me. That is what makes me, as a fan, the most annoyed. Do not change your original work to fit your prequels. That's lazy. That's lazy writing. That's lazy creation. And I give George tons of credit. You know, like, he brought Star Wars into this world, and it's a thing that brings lots of people together, and lots of people enjoy it. Don't go mess with it. You know? Respect your own work.
Like I said, too, I think part of the reason, like, a lot of the changes to the special editions didn't feel too bad because they came out before the prequels. You're kind of, like, taking stuff, it's like, all right, we're making some tweaks of what we wanted to do, but it was before the prequels. And like you said, now we're getting changes after the prequels are out. There was one thing that you mentioned in one of our other videos on how the big line where Leia remembers her mother and how that can't really be true because Padme died just moments after she was born.
Don't
and how
say forced memories.
No, they don't. It's not really forced memories. They're doing like a modern comic book that basically has young Padme or young Leia seeing like a statue or memorial of Padme, her mom, and that's kind of like the memories or whatever, or image of how she sees her. So it's kind of interesting that they're going and still making changes with other mediums or whatever to try to make things fit that they basically like changed in the prequels from the original trilogy.
That's so disappointing. Because part of that impact is that Luke never knew his mom. That whole discussion where Luke knows that they're twins at this point, and he's like, hey, do you remember your mom, your real mom? And Leia straight up says yes, but she was really sad. She was always sad. She was very beautiful, but sad. And like, in the context of like what happened with the downfall of the Republic and, you know, her murderous husband turning to the dark side and betraying everything, her constantly being just sad and disappointed, and then like maybe eventually giving into that like long trail of depression or something, that would have made so much more sense than what they did in episode 3 where I'm sorry, she's lost the will to live, Matt.
She just doesn't want to live anymore, Adolf. She just doesn't want to live anymore.
That's one thing where they're like retrofixing things, but one of the biggest, most egregious things, besides Hayden Christensen being put in Empire Strikes Back, there's this really good exchange between Vader and the Emperor, but it's played by not Ian McDiarmid, and it's all very, very cloaked, and he's talking about whether or not we were going to turn Skywalker or we're going to have to kill him or whatever. He went back and completely changed that scene to fit the prequels better. He put Ian McDiarmid in as the Emperor. He changed lines. He changed... I mean, that to me is the epitome of, like, just spitting in your fans' faces.
And I see both sides to it. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It is like that. I guess... I know this is kind of hypocritical. I enjoy that scene, I think, a little bit more now because it goes with it. But yeah, I totally agree with you. If you're a fan of that and stuff, I mean, to alienate old fans to appease your new fans kind of thing. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I don't think that he's even appeasing new fans, though. That's the thing. Like, no one who likes the prequels is saying, hey, well, at least no one I know. Let me be clear. No one I know that likes the prequels goes back and says, hey, I wish George Lucas would go change the original trilogy more to make it fit.
Well, if it works.
So he's not really even appeasing his newer fans when he made these changes. He's appeasing his ego. And when you watch the behind the scenes, when you watch the making of the prequels, there are times when you're like, you can see that the shock on other people's looks, in the room, like their faces. And it's like, no one's going to speak up to George Lucas. He had gotten to the point in his career where he could do whatever he wanted. He directed and wrote these films. But people forget that where he's great at storytelling and coming up with ideas, Empire Strikes Back, which is predominantly known as the best Star Wars film, was not written by him, was not directed by him. Return of the Jedi, not directed by George Lucas. I think it's important to know your limitations, and George Lucas got to the point where he's like, you know what, I don't have any.
A lot of people would keep hearing this, like, this is for kids. This is for kids. Remember, Star Wars is supposed to be for kids, has always been about kids.
It's hard for people to realize, and I'm not supposed to say this, and I wasn't supposed to say it then, but, it's a film for 12-year-olds.
I think that's another thing, too. With, like, the prequels, they're trying to get, like, the new kids is what they're aiming at. Like, the different series that we've got, like the cartoons or like Clone Wars, we're trying to get like the new kids for that, or the newer ones like Rebels and Resistance or whatever. We're trying to get like the newer kids into Star Wars to try to expand that a little bit. And I think the people that really like the prequels are the people that is what they were first exposed to when it comes to Star Wars. They saw the prequels when they were kids.
That being said, who took them to see the prequels? The fans of the original series, the original trilogy. Their parents took them to see the prequel films on the, hey, I'm a Star Wars fan and I like this. Not that it like, I saw this preview and it looks like it appeals to my kids. Like this is a kid's movie. Because I remember the episode 1 trailer when it came out, waiting at our library for 30 minutes while it loaded in the browser.
Push and play every once in a while to see like 5 seconds. Like,
it starts out by showing a tank, like over the field. So you get the Trade Federation tanks. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's for kids.
It's working! It's working!
No, parents took their kids, or adolescents to see Star Wars on the good memories and the fandom that they already had of the original trilogy. And I don't look at it, even the prequels or the sequel trilogy and be like, oh yeah, Star Wars, this is made for kids, If you pay attention to your fans and you care about the canon, you make a good thing, you make a good film or a good show that not only your existing fans will like, but because it's fits in with the greater idea or the greater storyline, you're going to bring in new fans, including, I want to share Star Trek with my daughter. I want her to know like TNG and DS9 and Voyager before she ever gets into new Trek. I want her to know what it was supposed to be about. And I think that that's what Star Wars was supposed to be about. The prequels, even though they're not as bad as I remember them as standalone films, I still don't like where they fit in overall context to the original trilogy, or even characters like Ahsoka in the Clone Wars.
One thing I'll talk about too is the prequels. I think we've seen a lot of resurgence of it. Some of it might be because of the sequels, and I think some people were like, well, they're a little bit disjointed, so maybe the prequels are a little bit better than we gave them credit for. But another thing I was kind of touching on a little bit too, I think it's because the people who really do enjoy the prequels, who saw it when they're younger, they're older now. They're the people that are, buying different stuff. They're the people making the internet memes and stuff right now. And I think that's a big part of it too. Like prequel memes on Reddit is really big. Obi-Wan is really huge. Like part of the internet, you'll see lots of stuff about Obi-Wan, and part of that reason is why we're getting a new Obi-Wan show, from Disney Plus.
It's because of Obi-Wan, isn't it, Matt?
It's because of Obi-Wan.
Because of Obi-Wan.
Like, that's the thing, too. If you're a Star Wars fan and anyone says hello there, like, the only respectable, acceptable response is
General Kenobi.
General Kenobi, from General Grievous. If anyone says hello there, that's the only way you can respond to that now.
I do think that a lot of people, and especially let's call it I'm not trying to trod on anybody. The conspiracy theorists about George Lucas taking over from Kathleen Kennedy, I see that daily on my YouTube feed about how they're going to retcon the entire sequel trilogy, about how they're going to have George Lucas take over, about how George Lucas is upset with it, and and Disney made a mistake. And I'm not saying Disney didn't make mistakes, because they clearly did.
Rey Skywalker.
Because of the way the sequel trilogy kind of panned out, so to say, we definitely are looking back at the prequel trilogies with a little bit more kindness, I think, than we previously were before the sequel trilogy came out.
I think it'll be interesting to see how Disney goes things forward. Like, we're seeing stuff with The Mandalorian where it seems like it does pay more respects to the originals while also giving us some new stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see from, like, movies, TV shows and stuff, what direction Disney takes to try to, are they going to focus more on getting new fans with the movies and then use the TV shows to appeal to older fans? It'll be interesting to see where Disney and stuff takes it forward and stuff with Star Wars in general.
Some of that Disney stuff that they've come out with, I know it's really mixed. I don't know why it's so mixed, like between critics and whatnot, but I absolutely love Rogue One. And I love Rogue One because it gives us new characters, it gives us new locations, it stays true to the original series. That kind of stuff works for me. That's the same reason I love Mandalorian. We're getting new stuff, we're getting different stuff, we're getting new mythology, but it still stays true to the original series. And for me, that's where even the Clone Wars, even though I love the series, falls flat. And that's where the prequels fall flat, because they just don't pay enough homage or care enough about canon to the original series. So you have my attention, Dave Filoni, with your new stuff, and Jon Favreau with his new stuff, and even to some extent Disney with Rogue One. I liked that they gave the director the go ahead to just kill everyone off, because if you don't, those missing characters make no sense in the context of the actual canon. That stuff's great.
I like when new stuff, like you said, like Rogue One or like Clone Wars, enhances what was already out. And I think the big thing is we just want stuff, the new stuff that come forward, to not change the old stuff. Have your new stuff enhance the old stuff, and not have your new stuff completely rewrite what you already spoke about in the old stuff. I think that's why we like stuff like Clone Wars, Mandalorian, Rogue One kind of stuff.
And I think that's why fans like us don't go back and watch the prequels very often. Because even though we can look back at them and say, all right, I remember that when I was younger, and I like this, or like that was awful, and Attack of the Clones is still terrible. We just look at it and we're like, this is the kind of the harbinger for when things started changing in Star Wars. And I didn't like that change necessarily. I like the prequels for what they are. They stand pretty well on their own. I just hold to my truths that even after rewatching them and all of the changes that George Lucas made, that they don't work with the original trilogy, and I wish they worked with the original trilogy a lot better.
Oh yeah, I echo. I'm in the same boat with you too. That's the great thing about Star Wars. Star Wars is so big that you have so many different fans, so many different views of Star Wars, whether you're a really big prequel fan or you're a really big fan of the original trilogy or a really big fan of the sequel movies, or in general, you're just happy to have new Star Wars. Wherever it's good or bad, you're just happy that new Star Wars is coming out so that you can continue to live in this world.
And you're just happy to be here.
And well, you're just lucky to be here, aren't you?
All right, this has been a good conversation, a good call-up episode for us. We have lots of other call-up episodes. If you like what we're doing here, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell icon if you always want to be notified of what's coming up. We also have a Facebook page. We always let you know the day before what video's coming out next. For now, I'm Randall here in Texas. See everyone later.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Have a good day. Next time on No Market Media. Please consider checking out some of our other videos.